Recognition, power, and influence is your birthright, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 206. I am super sorry about today's episode. I realize that it's coming out to you on the week of Thanksgiving, the week that we should be grateful for opportunities, the week that we get to spend time with our families. And in today's episode, I am talking about toxic work culture and what you can do about it. And the reason that I apologize for the episode in advance and the unfortunate timing of it is because I would prefer to have a conversation with you about gratitude. That would be my choice. But the overwhelming response from my clients and from the women in my community is that time and time again, they are put up in situations that feel incredibly uncomfortable, incredibly disempowering, and they really need support and tools to work through these situations. And so, honestly, I think it's actually timely. And perhaps for some of you who have less functional families, I'll use that language instead of dysfunctional, as if you're spending time with them over the holidays, the Thanksgiving holiday in America, or whatever you might be doing this week. I encourage you to listen to this episode, and I hope that it provides some perspective and some much needed forward mobility as you continue to navigate challenging situations. All right, let's get started.
Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms.
Hello, corporate badasses. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I'm your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to be here with you again this week. As you know, I've been pulling an oracle card every single week of my podcast to announce the sponsor for this week's episode. And this week, I have pulled White Tara. She is the goddess of sensitivity. You are becoming increasingly sensitive. Avoid harsh relationships, environments, situations, and chemicals. Again, you are becoming increasingly sensitive. Avoid harsh relationships, environments, situations, and chemicals. White Tara is the sponsor for today's episode, and it could not be any more appropriate because today I am talking to you about toxic relationships at work. And I'm laughing because she says right here, step number 1, which is to avoid harsh relationships. And that's actually step number 1 that I'm going to teach you about today. But before I do that, I want to kind of give a little bit of background where today's episode came from and kind of open up and share some of my own personal experience with toxic relationships at work. So recently, I've been offering a ton of workshops recently for free. And if you haven't attended one of those, or if you're not hearing about those workshops, please get on my email list ASAP. That's where I announce these workshops. I also announce them on social media, but the best way to find out about it is to go to stacymayer.com/email. And every single month I'm offering something else. I'm just like killing it with the free workshops right now. So definitely get on my mailing list and make sure that you join us for one of these workshops because they are a lot of fun. Now, I'm talking about the subject matter is toxic relationships at work, but they really are. I am very gifted at bringing together communities of women who support each other and grow together, and that is what happens on these workshops. So please come to our next one. It's going to be incredible, as always. So stacymayer.com/email. this past month, I decided to send out a poll to my email list and ask them what they wanted my next workshop to be about. We offered some suggestions based on emails and challenges that my clients actually go through on a regular basis. And I offered some ideas of different topics that we could discuss in a workshop. And almost unanimous vote was that I needed to talk about how to deal with toxic relationships at work. I was like, okay, well, that makes sense because unfortunately, 90% of my coaching conversations with clients are about dealing with a difficult boss or a difficult coworker or a situation that's just really out of control at their organization. So it's definitely something I have a lot of opinions about, and I tend to talk about at great length on a regular basis. So I was like, yeah, I have some things to share on this topic. But what I didn't expect is how much I didn't actually want to do the workshop. And so that's the first thing I want to share with you. And I shared this with the people who showed up live with me, is that talking about toxic relationships at work is not my favorite thing to do. Talking about changing the leadership table, yes, that is one of my favorite things to do. Empowering women to ask for a raise or a promotion, giving them strategies to communicate more powerfully in executive team meetings, helping them lead and manage their teams better, creating a community of women where we all support and give advice to everyone inside that community. That is what I want to talk about day in and day out. My number one strength in Gallup Strengths Finder is positivity. I am a very glasses half full person. I don't like talking about toxic relationships at work. And one of the reasons that I realized, like when I sort of asked myself this question, I was like, really? Is that what the subject's going to be on? Is sort of like, hey, Stacy, what's going on with that? Why do you not want to talk about this? And it's because so often, and you know, myself included, when I talk about toxic relationships, I sort of have this screw it attitude. In fact, on this very podcast, I did a series recently where I shared 3 podcast episodes in a row on how to deal with assholes at work. But that sort of has this flippant quality to it. And I really wanted to make sure that this workshop was more vulnerable, more raw, more getting to the root and the heart of the challenges that so many women face on a regular basis, or really anybody who works in the corporate world who doesn't look, think, and act like the rest of the room. There is so much toxicity in the corporate world, and I really wanted to give space for that and to allow people a forum to share about their experiences. So in order to do that, I decided, number one, I said yes to the workshop, which is huge, right? Even though I want to market happy, visionary stuff, I was like, all right, let's talk about it. Let's go there. And then I decided in my introduction, when I talked about myself, that I was going to be vulnerable and share my experience with a toxic relationship at work. And so that's actually how I want to start off today's podcast episode as well, and share with you what happened to me and my story. Now, again, I hesitate to share this story, or I hesitated to share this story on my workshop because I felt like it wasn't relevant. And that's a lesson as we're thinking about toxic relationships at work, is that your story feels incredibly personal to you, and it seems like maybe something that you kind of created. Perhaps like you played a role in that toxic relationship. Like maybe you feel like you did something wrong, or you could have done something better, or you could have noticed it sooner, or you could have stood up for yourself. And so toxic relationships and stories feel incredibly personal. But from my own experience in hearing these stories from all the women, 90% of the women that I work with, I realized the universality of toxic relationships at work. And everybody deals with this in some form or another, whether it's big T toxic or little t toxic. And by big T toxic, I mean really abrasive behavior, being told that you're stupid, being shut down in meetings very directly, people rolling their eyes at you, people telling you the only reason you got promoted is because you were a woman or you're going to fail. I've had women told that, like literally directly to their face, you are going to fail in this role. I mean, that is horrific to racism, very blatant racism that has happened to some of the women that I work with. And, that's big toxic relationships all the way to small toxic relationships, which is just sort of like that underlying thing where somebody says, gosh, I don't know how you do it all, or wow, it's amazing you can even handle this job. You have so much responsibility, right? Those microaggressions that women experience every single day. And we just feel off, or we just don't like our boss, or we have this sense that our boss is out to get us, or like, why is our boss making such bad decisions? Those are all that smaller T toxic relationships. And I want to acknowledge, like, whether it's big T toxic or small T toxic, I don't want to diminish the big T toxic at all, but the feeling that we get when those things happen is just as large. And so that's why I realized that I have to share my story, because it is relevant and it does matter, right? We all experience toxic relationships. So I worked at a hedge fund for over 10 years in Midtown Manhattan in New York City. And as part of that, I was actually an actress in New York City as well at the same time. And I refer to it as moonlighting as an actress and working at this hedge fund by day and actress by night. I had a personal relationship with one of my coworkers in that, we weren't dating, but it was a personal relationship in that we created a play together. We worked together and we co-wrote a play together. Oh gosh, even sharing this right now, I have to tell you, my heart started racing and I feel very sad. Anyway, I just want to be transparent and vulnerable. So the fact that these types of experiences, even I think this was, 15 plus years ago, and it still hurts. Anyway, this coworker of mine, through this outside relationship, decided to produce a lawsuit against me. Long story short about the lawsuit, because that's not relevant to the story, it all worked out. The lawsuit got dropped and it didn't even matter. All right, but I still have to work with this person. So it was a living nightmare. So prior to this situation, I got really great performance reviews. I got raises without notification. I had a pretty great life. My bosses loved me. Everything was very easy for me. After this, so he started, like, I don't even know exactly what was being said, but he would share with people, he would make up stuff. He went to human resources and filed a complaint about my work. We didn't really interact directly, but my boss started to call me into his office more often. Complaints were kind of coming up about me. My well-being was going downhill. I felt awful. I didn't want to go to work. I was phoning it in. So maybe some of these complaints were warranted. I don't know. It's hard to say. But anyway, needless to say, I was in a really dark place for a good 6 to 12 months at this job. And it felt awful. I was like, I need to quit. I need to get out of here. I need to protect myself. And the best that I could do at the time was get my desk moved. My physical office, I got it moved to another side of the floor. So I didn't have to physically engage with this person anymore. And that helped, right? Because I got space. I was able to kind of do my own work. I noticed that my self-esteem started to grow, started to pick up again. And then I think I ended up working there for 2 or 3 years longer. So it had a relatively speaking happy ending. But even today, sharing this story with you, I still tear up. I still feel like a lump in my chest. It hurts when I think about this situation. I feel a hardness, like I never want that to happen to me again. And next time that happens, I'm going to be so much stronger. I'm not going to let somebody get under my skin. Right? If any of you listening have experienced any form of a toxic relationship, big T or small t, you feel this, right? It's almost like if it's happening again for you. And I really want to offer to you in today's episode some space around this relationship and give you 4 ways that you can begin to look at toxic relationships at work that hopefully provide a little bit more freedom and perspective. That is my goal. So the first thing, and this isn't actually a step, but it's just to reiterate that your story matters. Sharing your story, the women inside of my leadership table mastermind, we've all been in it, right? And it's easy to think they've had so much success, but these women have been through the ringer, and their willingness to share their story. And I really do believe that part of the healing process is that I shared my story with you. And even in a way that feels truthful, like that feels vulnerable, as opposed to that complaining way that we so often share our stories when we're like, can you believe this thing happened to me? That person was such an asshole, right? Like how we complain to our spouse about what's happening or our friends. And I just want to offer that your story matters and really encourage you to, even connect with me. And if you want to work through something like this in coaching, like I said, I have a lot of experience helping women to the other side. And I strongly encourage you not to go through this alone and to reach out to somebody like me who can help you one-on-one in a very safe and supportive environment get to the other side, because your voice really matters. And when we're experiencing a toxic relationship at work, it's hard to feel like we have that voice. And quite honestly, we don't have that voice, right? We're not being heard because we're being shut down in some way. So I want to acknowledge that. And if you're at all interested in connecting with me, even before the end of the year, I encourage you to go to stacymayer.com/apply and reach out to me for a consult about working together and how I can support you to the other side. Now, let me get into these 4 steps to finding that freedom in a toxic relationship, to really being able to reclaim yourself and to own it. The number 1 step, the very first thing that you must realize with any toxic relationship at work is that there is dysfunctional leadership. I'll say that again. There is dysfunctional leadership. So in Buddhism, and I spent several years studying Buddhist practices, and I feel very closely connected to the teachings of the Buddha, there are the 4 noble truths. And the very first noble truth is there is suffering. And this noble truth has brought me a lot of freedom in my life. And so I want to share it with you from the sense of there is dysfunctional leadership. And the reason why I say that is because, I actually was just having this conversation with a woman recently who was like, I just need to get out of this job. I just need to go someplace else. I need to work for better leaders. My leadership in my group is just so dysfunctional. So that's a form of toxicity. Her leadership is not mean to her, but they're dysfunctional, right? She's like, I don't like going to work. I don't like working for these leaders. I don't like my leader. I don't like their leader. I don't like the leader above them. So I got to get out of here. And the first thing I said to her was, girlfriend, grass ain't greener on the other side. And I think so many of us know that that's true. And so that's why we often will stay in an uncomfortable relationship at work, because we know that if we just escape it, that it is going to be, we run the risk of going into just yet another toxic boss, right? Another dysfunctional leader. And so we tend to kind of stay in the same job a little bit too long because we kind of know that that's true. And this whole idea that we're just going to hop around and like somehow find a better situation is like, we're smart women. We get it. We know that that's not exactly how it works. But when we embrace that there is dysfunctional leadership, then we can make a choice for ourselves. We can say, what is the flavor of dysfunctional leadership that I am interested in changing to, right? What can I do about this dysfunctional leadership, and how can I continue to move forward? Because I'm not saying that you need to stay at that organization by any means. I'm not saying that you need to stay in this toxic culture. I'm not saying that you're always going to experience big T toxicity, racism, gender bias, flat out to your face telling you you're stupid. But what I am saying is that there is dysfunction in leadership. Ask the women inside of my leadership table who've gotten themselves promoted to the C-suite, and they're like, oh, crap. Like, my executive team is terrible, right? It's like dealing with kindergartners. How is that possible? And it just is. There is dysfunctional leadership. And so the way that we're going to kind of work through that is to really think about this analogy of a surfer and the chaos of the ocean and the waves of the ocean. And we're riding on a surfboard. We're standing powerfully on a surfboard amongst the chaos, right? The waves are crashing in. We're going from wave to wave to wave to wave. We're willing to skip around. We're willing to pivot to do something different. But ultimately, we're riding the waves of chaos. We're not just laying on the surfboard, kind of waiting for something to change. I hope I get the right moment. I hope I get the perfect situation. Or we're not just falling off the surfboard and crashing into the waves and getting thrown around and almost drowning. We're willing to step in and to ride the waves as they come crashing in, those waves of chaos. So step number 1 is identifying that there is dysfunction in leadership. Now, step number 2, and this is really important after you have realized this, is to stop. You have got to find a way to pause in that situation and give yourself space. You cannot solve the problem through anger, through pain, through suffering. You have to be willing to step away and just stop. You know, I had a woman who was experiencing huge amounts of toxic relationships at work from her direct boss, and she just felt awful every single day. And so she went on medical leave so that she could give herself that space. And truthfully, she needed it, right? She was sick. She was stressed. She needed to take that step away to pause and be able to come back and make a better decision. The story about being told that you're stupid is actually one of my clients who would meet with her boss one-on-one. And every single time she would meet with him one-on-one, actually it wasn't her boss. See, this is a caveat. It wasn't her boss. It was a person who was a higher level. It was a stakeholder. And she had to meet with him regularly one-on-one. And every time she did, he would tell her that she was stupid. Like, actually use those words, not imply it at all. And he was just very berating and very mean to her. She would often leave these conversations crying. Certainly, she left the conversations feeling bad about herself. And my suggestion to her was to stop doing one-on-one meetings with this person. And the reason that I said he wasn't her boss is because it mattered. So she was actually able to include her boss in those conversations. And I think for a lot of you, you'll say, well, isn't that career sabotage? Like, he's my stakeholder. So isn't like bringing my boss into it, isn't it saying that I can't do the job? No, it didn't at all. Like, she stood up for herself. She said, I will not be berated. I will do something about this. So she asked her boss. She didn't want to tell her boss, you know, for whatever reason, what was happening to her. But she did ask her boss if he could start attending the meetings with her. And he did. And you know what? The guy shaped up. He stopped. I mean, whenever somebody else was around, he never said negative things about her. And then eventually he got bored with the meetings. And so he said, you know, we can just work over email. Because usually when somebody is toxic like that and somebody really has that sort of really awful side to them, something else is wrong, right? And so when they can't win, when you're not playing the role of a victim, then they give up. It's sort of like a bully. If we don't give them the fodder, then they just sort of move on to the next victim. So that is a really important caveat and something to think about. Step number 3 is really understanding why this particular person or situation bothers me. This is really important because you could just say, well, they're an asshole, and so that bothers me. So I was literally driving down the highway today, and somebody threw a cup out their window on the highway. Like, literally, I saw their hand go out the SUV and throw it out. And I was like, how is that possible? Like, literally, like, I was like, what just happened? Do people still do that? Do people still just blatantly litter on the side of the road? Like, I mean, it just kind of completely blows my mind. And I don't know. Maybe you're a chronic litterer, and I don't mean to judge you, but to me, it goes against something that I believe in. I don't know, right? And me understanding that hits a chord, that type of negative behavior, that sort of like, honestly, asshole-ish nature, is completely unacceptable to me because that's not who I am. I would never treat anything like that, more or less our world, right? Mother Nature, like it so kind of blows my mind. And so if I can identify that I am the type of person that holds very true to this core value of care, and that we care for people, that we care for our environment, that we care for those around us, that we care for our words, that we really take responsibility that our words matter, then I can also accept that some people don't hold that core value, right? And so this is a really important inflection point in understanding that not everybody is like you. Not everybody is compassionate and empathetic. Not everybody believes that trust matters. Not everybody believes that care should be the number one thing on their list every single morning, right? And we believe it so strongly that we can't imagine that nobody else believes that too. But when you're dealing with these toxic situations, if you truly want to bring empathy, then you can just start to give yourself a little space and be like, well, clearly they don't believe in care, right? Like I'm thinking about this person who threw their cup. Clearly, right? So rather than feeling like it's a violation on me, then I can say, wow, clearly that person has a different core value of care than I do. That allows me to have some perspective. If I choose, I can have empathy for that person and be like, wow, I wonder what type of person, I wonder what that person thinks about, right? But I don't even have to go to that place. I don't have to forgive them. I don't have to have empathy for them. I can just acknowledge that human beings by nature are different, right? And if somebody's going to tell me to my face that I'm stupid, then they clearly have a different set of core values than I do, right? And so when we can recognize that, then we can pivot, we can do something different about it. And that leads me to my fourth step, which is what is the path forward? And for me, the path forward is 150% the middle way. It is always what I teach. It is everything that I live by, that we find within ourselves, that place that's in the middle. So let me give you an example of a woman who received a very negative feedback in such an obnoxious way via email from a coworker. So this person was her peer, but for some reason that person woke up that day and decided that he needed to email her everything he thought about her. And she really wanted to write him back and tell him how he was wrong, right? She wanted to kind of argue with him via email. And if you're listening, you're like, oh my God, don't do that. That'll never work. But I also understand the righteousness of that. Like I need to tell them, I need them to know that what they're doing, that behavior is wrong. And I have to tell them not only that, but I have to tell them all the reasons that literally what they said is actually incorrect information. So I need to set them straight, right? So I need to argue with them. So that's one extreme. That's another approach. The other extreme is that we shut down. So we sort of, oh my God, I see this all the time. Like we justify their feedback. We say, oh, well, maybe I just needed to hear that. Or we don't justify their feedback, but then we're like, you know what? Nothing's going to work. No matter what I say, it's not going to matter. I don't want to complain to my boss about him. So I'm just going to ignore the email and move on, right? Like I just like, whatever. Maybe he's having a bad day. I'm just going to just ignore it, right? And then we're not standing in our own integrity and we're not standing up for ourselves. So that's the other extreme, right? And then in the middle way of this situation, and this is what I coach my client to do, was to write him back and say, thank you for your feedback. I will take some of what you're suggesting up with insert their boss on Thursday when we meet, and then sign her name, right? That's it. Now, what she did in that middle way approach is she basically said, I will not be spoken to in this way. I will not engage with your negative behavior. I don't need to justify my actions. And I'm also willing to own it. If it's true, I'm going to have a conversation with my boss and figure out how can we get to the bottom of this atrocity that has been happening to you. Well, the good news, long story short, I'll tell you the ending, is that after she sent that email, he immediately wrote her back and apologized for his poor behavior. So if she had continued to engage and argue with him, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to apologize because the argument may have escalated. And then on the other side, if she just gave up and was like, whatever, he's, I'm just going to ignore him, then he also doesn't have the opportunity to apologize to her. Now, I'm not saying people will apologize to you because we clearly know we can't change other people, and especially toxic people. They're pretty set in their ways. So those are the 4 steps. Let me recap here my episode. This is a long one. And I was actually telling the women on the workshop, clearly I have a lot to say about the subject. I could probably write my second book on this subject. I'm sure I probably will. But I hope this gives you a sense of a path forward, what you can begin to do to create some space between you and this toxic relationship. Because what I really care about here is you advancing your career, you moving into an important power position of leadership. Let me recap the 4 steps. So the first thing is there is dysfunction in leadership, understanding that. The second thing we're going to do is pause and give space, whatever you need to do to just give yourself a little bit of gap and perspective. The third thing is knowing what core value is being triggered as part of this relationship. Identifying and really owning that part of you that is hurt, that is hurting, and that feels very confused by this other person's behavior. And then number 4, finding a path forward, that middle way. What am I going to do about it? What am I going to do instead? So those are the 4 steps. And then ultimately what we're doing if we want to change the leadership table is getting ourselves into that position of power and influence. And the more that we allow these toxic relationships to hurt us, to live with our career, I actually have one quick story that I want to share with you. I was on a panel discussion down in Austin last summer, and a woman raised her hand. She said, "How do I deal with a toxic boss?" This toxic boss was a boss from 3 years ago. She had been in a really great job since then. She loves her current situation at work. She got away from that toxic boss. Yet still, she's raising her hand at this women's leadership forum, and the identifying question is, how do I deal with a toxic boss? She doesn't currently have a toxic boss, but clearly she is worried that that is going to happen to her again, and she wants to make sure that she's armored and well prepared. No, I do not want this to be the thing that you wake up and think about every single morning. You have work to do that is so much more impactful than that stupid boss that you had 3 or 4 jobs ago. I want you to feel empowered to make big, badass decisions every single day of your career. I want you to get yourself into a position of influence and power so that you can become that spokesperson for other women, so that you can hold that space, so that you can get rid of that asshole performer on your team because you are the person in charge. You don't allow this type of behavior to happen because you are that type of leader. These situations would not bother you if you didn't have the core values of the opposite. It would not bother you if you didn't stand for something more. I want you to have a platform. I want you to have that power and influence. I want you to be recognized for your voice, and I want you to change the leadership table. We do that by getting you into a position of power. So if you're ready to get promoted, if you're ready to deal with this toxic situation, come in and coach with me. If you're already dealt with that toxic situation and you just want to advance to the next level of leadership, if you want to figure out how to negotiate your next promotion, salary, whatever is going on for you, come into one-on-one coaching for a very short period of time. I don't know how much longer I'm going to do this. I have an 8-week one-on-one coaching package, and I would absolutely love to work with you directly on whatever situation is coming up for you and to help get you into that position of power and influence. Thank you all so much for listening. There is light at the other side of the tunnel. I feel you. I have helped so many women get there. I am helping you. You are already on your path towards that next level of leadership. And let's keep going. All right. I'll see you again next week. Bye. go, I have a question for you. Do you know how close you are to your next promotion? Really? Not what your boss has told you, not what you even believe to be true, but have you actually taken the time to sit down, take an assessment, review the 5 categories that it takes to get promoted into senior executive leadership positions and decided where you fall in each category and given yourself a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 of how close you are to getting your next promotion? Have you done this? Well, now's your chance. If that feels interesting to you and you're like, hey, I want to know exactly how close I might actually be or how far away you might be and what it's going to take to get you even closer, then I invite you to take my promotability quiz. This is a quiz that I put together with practical tips that actually tell you where you're lacking and where you're winning. What are the areas that you actually need to improve and not necessarily what your boss is telling you all the time so that you can take concrete steps towards landing that next promotion and changing the face of the leadership table. Go to yourpromotabilityscore.com to take your free assessment today. Yourpromotabilityscore.com and let me know how it goes.